Hello and welcome to Tunze Tech Tips. Today we'll be discussing the Osmolator 3 Nano. Purpose of this video will be to cover what applications are suitable for the Osmolator 3 Nano, as well as installation and basic troubleshooting. Okay, so here we've got a small setup to demo the Osmolator 3 Nano. One of the first things we should cover is what this product is and isn't. So if you have a system under 60 gallons, this might be the product for you. The Osmolator 3 Nano is designed to be more or less an economy version of the Osmolator 3. The wiring is simplified. The complicated T cable or Y cable of the Osmolator 3, as well as the waterproof connectors, add considerable expense, as does the safety sensor, which is a thermal sensor on the Osmolator 3. On this product, those are omitted. The reason being, if you have a small desktop tank, you probably don't have as much invested in it. And so you might not want to spend as much on an ATO. You still want something reliable and safe, but if you can save $100, that makes sense. So this product, the safety is a time limit, and that's 77 seconds for tanks under about 25 gallons and below. And for 25 to 60 gallons, you would use the longer time limit. Those time limits are 77 or 154 seconds, and they're set by cycling the power 3 times in rapid succession. So we've got our sensor mounted in the tank, and we need to hook up our pump and the tubing. For a reservoir, I've just got this simple water jug here, but it's all we need for this test. So the tubing, the Osmolator 3 Nano has a more conventional screw fitting. It doesn't have the push fitting. So we push the tubing in onto the barb, and then we lock it down with the threaded nut. Now that's in. We place that in our reservoir. We've got our ATO hose. One thing to keep in mind with the hose is we always want to leave an air gap so that it can't back siphon water to the reservoir. We also want to make sure the reservoir water level is below the top of that hose. Now we have to make our connections, and this is something fairly important to be careful with, because this is one of the main comments I get, is that you get an orange light. In this case, I have a green light because the sensor's in water, so I'm going to need to lift it out. But we'll see, we have, actually in this case, a purple light, which indicates that there's no communication with the pump. Now, if we connect the pump, in this case, I've connected the pump fairly poorly. The pump's not running, so we're getting a blue light showing it tried to run the pump, then an orange light. So this is probably the most important thing to keep in mind with this unit. When you push this in fully, there's an audible click. And now you see the pump runs. Even though this is something that's familiar to most of us, just a headphone jack plug, it's a fairly high-end audiophile headphone jack plug, and it needs to be to make a secured contact and also to get a higher level of water resistance. So you have to push firmly. You will hear a click when that's fully engaged. But now we've got everything set up and working. I'm going to need to essentially reset it. But now we've got our pump running. We see it tops off. It's going to pulse a couple times to purge any air out of the pump and get running. And there we are. We've got our green light. It always runs for a few seconds and does a small purge once it turns on. But it's really a very simple product, but again, only suitable for smaller equipment. The things I should cover in regards to accessories and modifications that some people ask me about. So on the 3152, the older Osmolator Nano, A lot of people would ask about getting the water line up under the trim. On the Osmolator Nano, a limitation was that the float switch, being a magnetic switch, could be affected by a magnetic field, so we couldn't do this. But on the Osmolator 3 Nano, since the sensor is an optic sensor, we have a little more freedom with the magnets. So we offer this offset magnet. It's about a $15 accessory. Basically, you have the outside magnet that came with it, your offset magnet, which is part 3151501, and the sensor assembly. This lets us put the sensor assembly magnet up higher on this offset magnet and get up under the trim line. That way we can keep a higher water level, and you can get it to pretty close to or up under the trim line. And you can stack more magnets at a certain point. That's going to become impractical, but generally this will let you raise the water line 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. Another question that comes up is extending this cable, the pump cable. You need to keep in mind that there's a two-way digital communication between the pump and the controller. The driver for the pump is inside the controller, and the controller's monitoring that a pump's connected or that the pump's not jammed or blocked with air. And so they need to be able to communicate. There's a definite limit to such an extension. We don't offer an extension. We offer one for the Osmolator 3, but our general assumption is that this is a basic economy product that's going to be used on a simple all-in-one nano tank, something under 60 gallons, probably 40 gallons in most cases. And we just provide the cable length that comes with it. You can use an extension, but what you'll need to look for is it's going to need to be a very high quality headphone jack cable. You're going to be looking for some at gold plated ends. You need a female to male one with the 3 contacts. That's something else to keep in mind. This is typically what's referred to as a stereo plug. There's also with 4 contacts has a microphone built in, microphone contact, and then there's also with just 2, which is for mono. You want this stereo style with the 3 separate contact points. You'll have 2 black rings on it. And it needs to be a fairly heavy gauge wiring. So from looking around, generally if you were looking on Amazon or eBay or whatever, you're looking for a cable that's in the $15 to $25 range. A very economical $2 to $5 headphone jack extension is not going to work. The wire gauge is too small. The connections aren't very secure, and it'll just signal that there's no pump connected. So you can extend that. It's just a matter of finding the right cable to do so. And we generally would say if that's something you're looking for, you'd be better off with an Osmolator 3, where we do sell extension cables and it's made for more elaborate installation. Something else we should cover, I'd mentioned that you have 2 time limits, 77 or 154 seconds. Default is 77 seconds. And you can tell you're in that mode by the slow blinking white light on startup. So here I have the cap off. In the video you see a strobing. I'm looking at the camera while I'm recording this, and this is unfortunately an artifact of the higher frame rate of cameras, but you can see light effects that I can't see or you wouldn't be able to see with your naked eye. To me, it's a solid green light, but you'll see it as a bit of a flashing green light on your end on the screen. But what I'm showing here is how to set the speed. So if you saw that, there was a brief flash of the white light very slowly. That meant that I'm in the 77-second pump time. Now all I have to do is unplug the power and plug it back in 3 times rapidly. And now you can see there's a much more rapid white flash, and we have the 154-second time set. And we've just started it again, so it's going to prime the pump with these rapid pulses. But now that's all set and it's running, and we've got our green light showing the water level is correct. It's slightly overfilled from a few test runs here, and this is an incredibly small tank. This holds a little less than a gallon of water. So the last topic to cover is pump service and disassembly. You'll need a T10 Torx screwdriver. You have 4 Torx screws to remove. You will periodically have to open this pump to service it. Um, Small foreign objects can get in and be a source of obstructions. The other possibility is that the impeller, if you're using some additive in the water, could start to become calcified. But this is a serviceable pump. You can open it. You can remove the impeller and clean it inside. Again, it's T10 Torx. So now that we've got it open, there's an O-ring seal. The impeller is removable. You can either use a pick tool, or my preferred method is to throw and stop short. And you can see the impeller comes out. It's a sort of a turbine type impeller. The main thing to be aware of is you can see that clearance between the volute there is incredibly tight. It won't take much to jam that. And while the pump does try to free itself if there is an obstruction, it can only do so much. It basically starts and stops and tries to turn back and forth and work that out. But the time may come that you need to open it and service this, and this is how. One last thing to cover. So the fitting on here will not fit into the opening of a jug. Our general guidance with any of our pumps, old Osmolator, new Osmolators, do not use a jug. You may need to be able to access the pump. You may need to be able to turn it up to purge air. And in a jug, you can't do that. But if you're insistent on using a jug, we do make a slimline fitting. It is less secure because there's a lot less to hold the hose. But this fitting, it's part 5030.201, and it can be used on the Osmolator 3 or Osmolator 3 Nano. You can remove the fitting that's on here and replace it with this essentially slimline fitting that'll give you a direct hose connection, and it will then fit in a typical 5-gallon jug. You're better off using a bucket. It's probably going to be quieter. Another thing to consider, plastic will always be quieter than glass. A glass or acrylic reservoir is going to be a rigid material that can reverberate and transmit vibration. Soft-sided plastic bucket, which is your cheapest option, will not have those issues. If you wanted to add a fitting to the inlet, the threads on this is BSP. This is 1/2 inch BSP. This is 3/8 inch BSP. These are fittings that are available, but if you go to the hardware store and buy typical US NPT fittings, you're going to crack these. You need to source BSP fittings if you're trying to make some modification. The difference is BSP is not tapered. NPT is tapered, and as you tighten that in there, you're going to crack this housing. So keep that in mind if you do any mods to these pumps. It is a very well-made pump with a long service life. You can replace the impeller. You can do a lot of things with it. But we do want you to just use it in a standard bucket. That's what's going to be the most reliable and most serviceable use. But you could do a lot of different things with fittings and make it suit your needs.